When a man is attracted to you, he usually isn't going to come right up and say it. That almost never happens. Instead, he shows it through tiny actions, small reactions that happen so quickly you can miss them if you're not paying close attention. And this is where so many women get confused. They're watching for the wrong signs. They're waiting for him to ask them out, give a huge compliment, or make some bold move that clearly reveals his feelings. But the strongest clues often appear long before any of that. They show up in little gestures that last only a second or two, small moments that most people never notice. Here's something that can completely change the way you read attraction. A man who is genuinely interested in you can't fully hide it. He may believe he's acting calm. He may think he's keeping everything under control and giving nothing away. But his body tells a different story. Without even realizing it, these small signals slip out. He doesn't plan them. He isn't thinking about them. They simply happen. And if you know exactly what to look for, you can understand how he feels without hearing a single word. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn might completely change the way you see every conversation from now on. The details matter far more than most people realize. Once you notice them, you can't unsee them. That's when everything starts making a lot more sense. The biggest problem is that most women never learn what these signals actually look like. They miss them without even knowing it. Then they end up feeling completely confused. They ask themselves, "Does he like me? I honestly can't figure him out. He's impossible to read." But many times, the answers have been sitting right in front of them the whole time. The signs were there. They just didn't recognize them because nobody explained what quiet attraction really looks like. They expected loud signals, when real interest often shows itself in very subtle ways. That's where mistakes happen. Some women spend months hoping for a man who isn't interested because they misunderstand ordinary kindness. Others walk away from someone who truly likes them because they assume nothing is happening. They never notice the little clues that quietly reveal his feelings. Imagine how many opportunities are missed simply because people are looking in the wrong direction. Keep watching, because the next few minutes may completely change the way you understand attraction. And trust me, one of the final gestures surprises almost everyone the first time they recognize it in real life. The truth is surprisingly simple. When a man secretly likes you, there are several natural gestures that often appear without any effort on his part. These are not rehearsed moves. They are not tricks. They are automatic reactions that happen because emotions are difficult to hide for long. His body responds before his mind has a chance to stop it. That's why these signals can be much more honest than carefully chosen words. Some of them flash across his face for only a moment. Others happen while he's listening to you, laughing with you, or simply standing nearby. If you blink, you might miss them. But those brief moments can sometimes tell you more than a long conversation ever could. That's why paying attention to patterns matters. One signal by itself doesn't always mean attraction, but when several of these small gestures begin showing up together, they paint a much clearer picture. By the end, you'll understand why certain people always seem able to tell when someone is interested while others stay confused for months. And the final gesture we're going to talk about is one you'll probably start noticing almost everywhere once you know what it means. Most people never pay attention to these tiny details, and that's exactly why they stay confused. They keep wondering, they keep waiting, they keep hoping something will finally happen, even when the answer has already been there the whole time. Sometimes they spend months expecting a sign that never comes. Other times they miss something real because they couldn't recognize what was happening right in front of them. That's why understanding these small signals can completely change the way you see your conversations. So let's start with the very first gesture. And trust me, after hearing this, you may think back to every conversation you've ever had with a man you liked and notice something you completely missed before. Picture this. You're talking about almost anything. Maybe it's work, maybe it's weekend plans, maybe it's a funny story that doesn't even matter. While you're speaking, his body slowly turns toward you. Not just his face, his entire body, his shoulders, his chest, even his feet. Everything naturally points in your direction, almost as if you're the only person around. Most women never notice this because they're paying attention to the words instead of the silent conversation happening through body language. Stay with me because the next detail makes this even more interesting. Here's why this matters. When a man is simply being friendly or polite, his body usually stays relaxed and open. He may look at you while you're talking, but the rest of his posture stays connected to the room. His shoulders may face different people. His feet point somewhere else. His attention moves around naturally because he's comfortable joining different conversations. But when real attraction begins to grow, something changes. His body slowly blocks out everything else. Without realizing it, he starts facing you more directly. His shoulders line up with yours. His feet point toward you. If you're both sitting down, even his knees often angle your way. It's almost as if an invisible force keeps pulling his attention back to you. He isn't giving himself instructions to do this. It simply happens because his focus has settled on one person. That's the important difference. Attraction often appears through actions that happen automatically instead of intentionally. And that's why these little movements can reveal much more than carefully chosen words. Don't miss what comes next, because this is where many people completely misunderstand what they're seeing. A lot of women assume this is simply good manners. They think he's only being respectful or showing that he's listening carefully. And yes, good listeners usually turn toward the person who's speaking. But there's a clear difference between polite attention and genuine attraction. Polite attention naturally shifts around the room. He turns toward you for a moment, then toward someone else when they speak, then back again. His focus moves freely. Attraction is different. His attention feels more settled. Once he faces you, he often stays there longer than necessary. Even when other people join the conversation, his posture keeps drifting back toward you. His body seems reluctant to fully move away. Here's something even more revealing. Watch what happens when he isn't talking directly to you. Imagine you're both standing in a group. He's having a conversation with someone else, but where does his body naturally settle? Does it stay completely focused on that person, or does it quietly angle back toward you? Many times, someone who's interested keeps finding little reasons to stay physically connected without even realizing it. His attention keeps returning almost automatically. Now here's the reality that many people don't like hearing. If his body never really turns toward you, if he's almost always facing another direction, if his feet consistently point somewhere else, or if his shoulders stay completely open to everyone except you, that usually tells you something important. It doesn't automatically mean he dislikes you. He may genuinely enjoy your company. He may think you're kind, interesting, or fun to talk with. But that deeper pull, the quiet attraction that naturally draws his body closer, may simply not be there. That's why looking at repeated patterns matters much more than focusing on one single moment. And now let's move to the second gesture, because this one is even easier to miss. In fact, it happens so quickly that many people never notice it at all. But once you know what you're looking for, you'll begin spotting it almost everywhere. So pay close attention because this next signal often appears before a single word is spoken. Picture yourself walking into a room. It could be a party, it could be the office, it could be a family gathering, or any place where people are talking. Before you've even had a chance to look around, his eyes have already found you. It isn't a long stare. It isn't obvious or uncomfortable. It's usually just one quick glance that happens almost instantly the moment you appear. Then, just as fast, he may look away again as if nothing happened. Almost like he hopes you didn't catch him looking first. That tiny reaction tells you something important because our attention naturally moves toward the people who matter to us. We notice them before we notice almost anyone else. It happens without planning. It happens before logic steps in. And if you start paying attention to these quick first glances instead of waiting for dramatic moves, you'll begin seeing a completely different side of human attraction. Keep watching, because the next signal becomes even harder to fake. That quick glance matters more than most people realize. It lasts only a moment, but it often reveals something honest. That first look is usually pure instinct. It's his attention finding you before he has time to think about it. Let me explain why this happens. When a man is attracted to someone, that person naturally becomes part of his awareness. He notices whether they're around. He notices when they leave. He notices when they arrive. Not because he's constantly thinking about them every second, but because his mind has quietly marked them as important. So when you enter a room, his eyes often move toward you automatically. It isn't planned. He isn't sitting there telling himself to look. It simply happens. Imagine walking into a gathering. Maybe it's a workplace event, maybe it's a party, maybe it's a casual group meeting. Before you've even scanned the room, he has already noticed you. Sometimes you can actually feel it. You glance across the room and catch him looking your way. Then, almost immediately, he looks somewhere else. Maybe he gives a quick smile. Maybe he nods and goes back to what he was doing. Maybe he pretends he wasn't looking at all. But that first reaction is often the important part. Stay with me because this detail becomes even more interesting once you understand what it means over time. Many women dismiss this as coincidence. They tell themselves it doesn't mean anything. They assume he just happened to glance in their direction at the exact moment they walked in. But here's where paying attention to patterns becomes important. One glance means very little. Repeated glances tell a different story. If every time you arrive somewhere his attention seems to find you within the first few seconds, that's usually not random. That's awareness. That's someone whose mind naturally checks for your presence. Think about the people who matter most in your own life. You tend to notice them quickly when they enter a room. You don't have to force yourself to look. Your attention naturally moves there. The same thing can happen when attraction is involved. And here's another interesting part. Sometimes there is a tiny shift in his energy the moment you arrive. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just a slight increase in alertness, a little extra focus, a small spark of excitement. His body recognizes your presence before his thoughts fully catch up. That's why these reactions happen so quickly. Don't miss this next point, because it's where many people completely misread the situation. A lot of women see him glance over and then immediately look away, and they assume that means he isn't interested. They think, if he liked me, wouldn't he keep looking? Not necessarily. Sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes he looks away because he suddenly becomes aware that he was looking. He doesn't want to appear too obvious. He doesn't want to seem overly eager. He doesn't want it to look like he's been waiting for you to arrive. So he quickly redirects his attention. But that first glance already happened. That instinctive reaction was real. Of course, there is another side to this. If you repeatedly enter places where he is and he never notices, never looks up, never seems aware that you've arrived until someone points it out, that can tell you something too. Attraction usually creates awareness. Without that awareness, the signal simply isn't there. And now let's move into another gesture because this one happens right in front of you during everyday conversations. Once you notice it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. And trust me, this one is much harder to hide than people think. Picture yourself talking in a group. Maybe someone is telling a story. Maybe the conversation is casual and relaxed. You make a comment, you tell a joke, you share an observation, then watch his face. Does he smile? Does he laugh? Does his expression brighten in a way that seems different from everyone else's reaction? Here's something interesting about attraction. When someone likes you, they often experience your words differently. Your jokes seem funnier, your stories seem more interesting, your comments carry a little extra weight. That doesn't mean they're pretending, it means their emotional connection changes how they experience what you say. That's why a man who likes you may laugh harder than everyone else. He may smile longer. He may seem genuinely delighted by things that other people barely notice. Pay attention to the way his face changes when you're speaking. Does he lean forward slightly? Does he hold eye contact longer? Does he seem fully present instead of distracted? Because attraction often creates a special kind of attention, and that attention is difficult to fake for long. Keep watching, because what comes next reveals even more. The biggest difference is usually in the quality of the reaction. When someone isn't attracted, their responses often stay polite and even. You say something funny, and they give a quick smile. You tell a story, and they listen respectfully. Nothing wrong with that, but nothing especially different either. When attraction enters the picture, the reaction often feels warmer. Your joke gets a bigger smile, your story gets more focus, your opinion receives genuine interest. There's an energy behind the response that wasn't there before. Sometimes his eyes light up before he even speaks. Sometimes he remembers details from things you said days ago because he was actually paying attention. That's the key. He's present, he's engaged, he's invested in the interaction. Many women make the mistake of comparing these reactions to how he behaves with his closest friends. That's not always the best comparison. Instead, watch how he interacts with other women, co-workers, or casual acquaintances. If you consistently receive more attention, more smiles, more engagement, and more warmth than they do, that's meaningful. On the other hand, if your stories receive almost no reaction, if your jokes constantly fall flat, if he seems distracted every time you speak, that's information too. And what comes next may be one of the clearest gestures of all, because the fourth signal often appears before either person realizes what's happening. The next signal is physical. It's all about space, and it quietly reveals how comfortable he feels around you. Watch the distance between you. Does he naturally move a little closer than necessary? Because everyone has a personal space bubble. We protect it without even thinking. We don't invite everyone into it. But when a man feels attracted to someone, that invisible bubble often becomes smaller. He may stand closer than the situation requires. He may choose the seat beside you even though several others are empty. When you're walking together, he naturally stays close instead of drifting several steps away. These little choices happen again and again. They're rarely dramatic, but they matter. Imagine you're at a gathering with plenty of room, yet he still ends up standing close enough that you're aware of his presence. You're sitting on a sofa, and instead of taking the opposite end, he sits beside you. Those moments are worth noticing because they often show where his attention naturally wants to be. Stay with me, because the next detail makes this signal even more interesting. Once you understand it, you'll begin noticing patterns that were easy to miss before. Now pay attention to what happens when he's already close. Watch his hands. Does he lightly touch your arm while making a point? Does his hand briefly brush against yours while walking? Does he find tiny moments of harmless contact that seem accidental, yet happen a little too often to be completely random? Someone who feels drawn to you often looks for small, natural ways to create connection. Nothing dramatic, nothing inappropriate, just quick moments that allow him to feel a little closer. Many people misunderstand this. They assume that standing close only means he's friendly or comfortable. And sometimes that's true, but friendly closeness usually still leaves a comfortable amount of space. Attraction often creates a gentle pull that naturally reduces that distance. Here's a simple way to observe it. Watch how he behaves with other people. Does he stand just as close to everyone? Does he choose the seat beside every woman in the room? Or is this closeness something that mostly happens with you? Patterns tell the story, not isolated moments. Keep watching because the next gesture is even more revealing, and it often shows a quiet battle between what he's trying to hide and what his body keeps revealing. This next signal may sound unusual at first, but once you notice it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. While you're talking, take a quick look at his hands. Does he touch his face, run his fingers through his hair, adjust his sleeves, straighten his shirt, check his watch, or pick up his drink only to put it back down again? Here's why that matters. Strong emotions create extra energy. When someone feels excited or slightly nervous around a person they like, that energy often shows up through small movements. His hands become busy without him realizing it. Someone who feels completely relaxed usually keeps their hands fairly still. But someone feeling attraction may start making tiny unconscious movements that help release that nervous excitement. You might notice him touching his jaw, rubbing the back of his neck, smoothing his hair, or adjusting something that doesn't really need adjusting. These are subtle reactions. Most of the time, he has no idea he's even doing them. And that's exactly why they can be so revealing. Don't skip this next part because it's one of the biggest mistakes people make when reading body language. Many women assume fidgeting means boredom or distraction. They think that if he were truly interested, he'd sit perfectly still and stay completely calm. But often the opposite is true. A little restless energy can mean something important is happening inside. The key is knowing the difference. General nervousness usually looks scattered. His attention jumps around the room. He's distracted by everything. Attraction often looks different. The movements stay small and focused. They happen mostly around his face, hair, hands, or clothing, especially while he's talking with you or listening closely. His body is quietly responding to the emotional energy of the interaction. Of course, one small habit alone doesn't prove attraction. Some people naturally fidget all the time. That's why you should always look for repeated patterns instead of relying on a single sign. And now let's move to another gesture that doesn't depend on body language at all. This one is about choice. It's about effort, and it often reveals genuine interest more clearly than anything else. Think about your conversations together, not quick small talk, but real conversations. Does he ask thoughtful questions? Not just polite questions, but ones that show he truly wants to know more about you. Does he ask about your work, your family, your opinions, your dreams, or the things that matter to you? Someone who is only interested on the surface often keeps conversations light, but someone who is genuinely interested starts building a picture of who you are. You mention something about your job, and instead of simply saying, "That's nice," he asks what you enjoy most about it. You talk about your family, and days later, he remembers something you shared and asks how things turned out. You mention a hobby, and he becomes curious enough to ask follow-up questions. Those moments matter because they show attention. They show investment. He isn't only listening to reply, he's listening to understand. That's a completely different experience. Keep watching because the final signal brings everything together in a way that surprises almost everyone. Here's the last gesture, and in many ways, it's the easiest to miss. Most people watch where someone's eyes go during a conversation. That's expected. Anyone who's being polite usually looks at the person speaking. Instead, notice where his eyes go when he thinks you're not paying attention. Maybe you're talking to someone else. Maybe you've turned away for a moment. Maybe you're looking at your phone or laughing with a friend. That's when his guard often drops. You suddenly notice him looking at you from across the room. You catch him watching out of the corner of your eye before he quickly looks somewhere else. Those quiet moments can reveal far more than direct eye contact. People naturally look toward what captures their attention. When someone feels drawn to another person, their eyes often return there without any conscious effort. He isn't reminding himself to look, it simply happens. If you want to notice this signal, don't stare back waiting for it. Instead, pay attention to those brief moments when you're focused on something else. Sometimes you'll sense it before you even see it, that familiar feeling that someone is quietly watching. Then you glance over, and for just a second, your eyes meet before he quickly looks away. Those are the moments that often speak the loudest without a single word being said.